Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Gina Schaefer, and I am really excited to be here with the folks from the NHPA to talk about leading a diverse staff. I am a retailer, an Ace Hardware retailer. I have 13 stores in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, and then some of the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And as a woman-owned business, diversity for us, for me, is something that I've been very passionate about for many years. And I think particularly over the last year or two has become more important to retailers, and there's been more awareness about it. So this conversation I think we're about to have is going to be really timely, and hopefully you'll take away some nuggets that can help you in your organization. We're going to look at 4 different things that we do here at my business. Some of these we've taken from other retailers. We get a lot of input and help from ACE. We get a lot of input from the association. So we're going to talk a little bit about annual pay equity study, which is something we've started here, tracking employee satisfaction, turnover reporting, which has become so valuable for me as a CEO to figure out what's going on, to get a pulse of what's going on within the company, and then what we're doing to take action. Throughout the conversation, the questions will be monitored. So if you want to send in a question via chat, that would be fantastic. We will have some time set aside throughout the presentation for me to answer those questions. So we're going to just kick it off with the annual pay equity study. And this started probably for us 4 years ago, when it dawned on me that as a woman-owned business, all of you have probably heard the statistics, that there are oftentimes in many industries instances when the male and female employees are not being paid the same amount. And it could vary drastically depending on the industry you're in. And I, as a woman-owned business, like I said, wanted to make sure that I wasn't walking around talking about how equal we were if I couldn't put statistics on the table, if I couldn't actually back it up with data. So I asked my ACE Reward or HR manager to help start measuring some annual equity pay for us. And so these are a couple of the things that we look at. Looking at the equity pay for gender then led to equity pay for ethnicity. We wanted to make sure that if we were tracking metrics across the company, we were looking at it from a variety of angles. That first year, we just did gender pay equity, and I will tell you that we ended up being 15 cents off, so it wasn't completely equal across the board. And the 15 cents actually in that case was in the favor of the women. So we came out quite different than a lot of industries would. I was really proud of the fact that that's where we were going. But one thing that I've learned in all of the reporting that we're going to talk about, in case I forget to say it elsewhere, is that none of these things can happen once and then be done. I think as leaders, we're inundated, daily almost with data and numbers and reports. And oftentimes, and I've been guilty of it, they go in the trash. We look at them and we put them in a folder and we put them in the filing cabinet. And we either don't think about them or look at them until the next year, or we never do it again. So with my HR manager, we've put in place reporting structures that we think are really valuable for making the business run well, and actionable measures on those reports. And so if something has been suggested that we decide we can't take action on, we don't do it. Equity pay study is something we're very passionate about. We feel is very important for the company. And so these are the numbers that we look at. And we do these reports once a year. Once the reporting structure is done, and it's our HR manager that runs that. So some of you, depending on what size you are, you may have an outside payroll company that you're using, or you may still be doing it manually inside. Both of those present an opportunity to track this kind of data. It might be a little bit easier if you have a payroll system that you can just run a report for. That's what we do. We currently use Paylocity as our payroll provider, and we've set up some reporting with them that allows us to be able to run the pay equity study. But the results of the study are initially just reviewed with the director of HR and then our CFO and myself. Once we do that, we share it with the entire leadership team. And the leadership team in this case is our back office team and our store managers. We want to make sure that they know that we're looking at this and that we think it's important. The managers are actually inputting the pay rates for the employees, and you can see where across 13 locations, we liken a lot of this to the telephone game. So we may tell one manager to handle something one way, and then by the time it gets to the 13th, it changes. People hear things differently. They react to it differently. And so we want to make sure that everyone knows that this is something that we're looking at very closely. We present it to the entire leadership team, and then we talk about what changes might need to be made. Is there a particular location where it seems things may have gotten off balance. What kind of changes might that need to be made? Is there a particular group of people or particular location where we have to put a plan in place to update payroll, to work with the manager to figure out why things had gotten off track, what we can do to make it more balanced as the rest of the company is already balanced. So looking at each store individually and talking with the managers about what we can do to improve that process. I know I went through that sort of quickly, but it's just one report that we run. It's one tool in our toolbox. And so if there's any questions that you have, I'd be happy to answer those specifically about this report right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and ask some questions for this section. So we had a question come in asking, how could a retailer form their own similar pay equity study in their operation? And I know you mentioned smaller size stores, but how do you think this would be done from a smaller scale?
So if you, just for example, if you had one location, I'm thinking back, we had quite a few locations before we started doing this, but manually looking at 20 employees' pay rates is not a hard process, right? I mean, it could be very, very manual. You're writing it on a piece of paper. It could be, tracked in an Excel spreadsheet and then formatted or, oh my gosh, my vocabulary is leaving me today. But then you can segment it out based on the pay rates and somebody's job title as a single store, or probably as 1, 2, or 3 stores. It wouldn't be that long of a manual process to take a look at it. There are outliers that might immediately show up. You're probably going to remove the management level. And so if you're looking at the sales associate level, you'll be able to track what those numbers are fairly quickly. I think despite it needing to be a little more manual, if that's the case, if you're not using an outside payroll service, I don't think that it's going to be that big of a problem to run.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And then one other question we had was, what kind of response have you gotten from your employees based on the results? And I know you said you let the team, at least your leaders, know that this is going on. So what has kind of been the response from those that know that this is part of the business now and the business operations overall?
So I would say anecdotally with the managers, we have a philosophy. We don't micromanage. My husband is my business partner. And he acts as, his function is the CFO. And we are not micromanagers. We treat the managers like they own the store. We expect them soup to nuts to be handling the day-to-day operations. But we do believe that you should inspect what you expect. And when we're talking about making sure that we maintain diversity and equity across the company, if we're not following up with that leadership team and making sure that's happening, we're not inspecting those things. We don't reinforce the fact they're important. So we've gotten really personally feedback saying, I'm really glad you're looking at this. I didn't realize I was off track. Can we talk about how I can get back on track, that sort of thing. So a lot of that's anecdotal, but it has happened every time we've had these reports and we see something that may be an outlier. No matter how small it is, we've gotten feedback about, I'm really glad we're looking at this and I can make it work.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I will see you for the next round of Q&As.
Sure. Thank you. So the next thing we're going to talk about is employee satisfaction. And there's 2 ways that we manage this process. And this is also linked to employee or management bonuses. So it becomes a bigger issue, when it affects someone's bonus structure or annual salaries. So we do take an annual employee satisfaction survey that we do through our partner with ACE. And so this is a program that they help administer for us that is done anonymously, and it's sent to every employee in the company from myself all the way through each one of the stores. The nice thing about, managing this anonymously with a third party is that you can track, for example, if there's a 2-week deadline to get the surveys finished, you can tell after a week who's not completing the survey, not specific people, but which stores. So if one of my stores has 30 employees, and a 1 week into the cycle, only 15 of them have taken the survey, we want to make sure that we get more participation. And so we have the time to be able to follow up. And, sometimes it takes a little bit of cajoling to get people to get it set up and get it taken, but it's important that it's done. It's one of the only strongest ways we can measure employee satisfaction. With having cold hard data written down. So we take there's 2 levels of satisfaction that we're looking for. We're looking for a mid-tier of 70% or better. And of course, that's only a C. So in my brain, that's not great. And then 80% or greater. And those two numbers are then tied to a bonus structure for the managers. I will tell you, just to give you some inside scoop, when we did this last, I had 8 stores that completed 80% or above. I had 2 stores that were between 70% and 80%, and I had 3 stores that were below 70. Now, as the CEO, my HR director will tell you I freak out when I see those numbers, but it also triggers a whole host of other things that have to happen because nobody wants to be below a C. I don't even want to have a C, but my point is that anything below 70 really triggers something that has to happen. So once that happens, remember I said that oftentimes we run these reports and they go into a file and they go into our cabinet or into the trash and we don't look at them again. This now triggers a development plan for that store. If a store can't get to a 70% of an employee satisfaction rating, there has to be things going on at that location that we as leaders need to discuss and talk about. Now, sometimes I hear myself talk about this stuff and I think, oh, we're so good at all of it and it's perfect. And this is why I told you that 3 of the stores didn't make the cut, because it's really hard for people to be satisfied all the time or at a certain level. And it's particularly hard when you're maintaining a culture across a variety of locations. And so we put the store on a plan because that store will take the survey again 3 months later. We do not wait for the next year to come around. So the plan may include an employee recognition program. Is that manager recognizing the employees in that store enough? Do we have to look at the scheduling and why people are people unhappy because of the way they're being scheduled, the way they're being evaluated, the way they're being, praised, or having any type of communication input from the managers. And so there's a variety of things that go into that plan. And then 3 months later, they take the survey again. Now, the expectation when that survey is taken again, they will certainly get above that 70. We are hoping to get that 80 or above. And if that doesn't happen, there are some more serious repercussions that will then occur in that location. We do the same thing that we do with the pay equity study with a little bit farther outreach. So it's reviewed again with my husband, the CFO, and the director of HR. We talk about where we might see outliers. We talk specifically about those 3 stores in this last case that fell short of the goal. And then we present it to the entire leadership team. Now, not everybody does this. When it's presented to the leadership team, I've always taken it's always been my philosophy that you air, I shouldn't call it dirty laundry, but we don't sugarcoat it. We are a team and we need to get better. And everybody needs to know if there's someone on the team that needs help. So we do not hide all of the challenges that may come in from the surveys, what store may have gotten those negative pieces of feedback, but we share it with the leadership team, the back office and the managers, and then the HR manager and or myself will meet with the managers to discuss what needs to be improved before they do it again. We then also send those reports out. We don't put the store names when we do this, but we send the results out to the entire company. Again, we want transparency. We want the staff to know that we're looking at these things, that their feedback really makes a difference and matters, and that we're sharing it with everybody all throughout the process. And so, again, it all sounds so easy when you say it like that and you're just talking about it in the various steps. The important part about this, I think, is that it's not a one and done. It's the one, and then if there's a problem, if there are red flags, it's another 3 months only 3 months until we start the process again. So we take it very seriously. The communicating the results, exactly what I just said, who we're communicating it with. I think that's probably the most important part, going back to me saying we're inundated with things that we don't pay attention to. It needs to be actionable, and we want to make sure that we're taking action on the input that the employees give us, so they know that we're taking their opinions very seriously. So I'll pause there a second and see if Renee's got any more questions on the chat line for us.
Yeah, we got some more. So for retailers with a smaller footprint, do you think an employee satisfaction survey is possible or would work? And I know you mentioned that you use your co-op ACE to facilitate that. Do you think that there are probably similar things across all different wholesalers, or is there other opportunities for them to create these types of surveys even on their own, you think?
Yeah, I haven't actually researched the apps, but you can find everything online right now, right? So I would say if somebody's co-op or wholesaler partner doesn't have something that they can use, there are other ways to get to this kind of program. There have to be apps, I'm sure. I know we work with a third-party accounting software company that has an entire leadership development program. And so I know that I can go to them if I decided that I didn't want to use the ACE program. And so that's super helpful. When you are smaller, I will caution to say it's much easier to figure out who may have said something negative, why they might have said something negative. It feels less anonymous when you're smaller. And I only caution to say that should not affect any of the go forward action. So for example, if somebody says we're going to talk about stay interviews in a minute, and this is a really good example where this comes up. If somebody says something that really doesn't sit well with you, like they're very negative about something, or they had some pretty candid feedback that wasn't positive, and you know who it is, that shouldn't affect you taking action on those comments. And so everybody, I think, should be doing surveys no matter what your size. But you have to make sure that as a leader, you're able to separate knowing who might have made a comment and the follow-up action that you take.
Yeah. So basically trying not to take it too personally and separating the two.
Yes. Thank you. The anonymity is really important when you're trying to get people to be candid, and I want candor as a leader, because we'll never get better if we don't know. So
I agree. And then how would you say that having an employee satisfaction, like doing this, ties into diversity, equity, and inclusion overall? And do you have any examples of how this might have impacted someone from a different background at all?
Well, I would say a couple different things. To be completely candid, there have been a couple occasions where I will assume that they were female employees, made comments in the surveys that reflected, being a woman in the hardware world and some of the challenges we might experience. And so from that standpoint, if I were to receive comments like that more than once, from one particular location, that might be a conversation with the manager. Hey, let's just talk about what might be going on, or what might not feel equitable or comfortable in this particular location. Sometimes it's the customers, the way the customers might be treating a particular population that needs to be addressed. So that group of employees knows, this is not acceptable. We want to make sure that you're comfortable in your workplace. And so probably that would be the easiest way to answer that question. So yes, it ties into making a more comfortable workplace in general.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That answers the question, I think. Perfect.
Cool.
Great. Well, I'll see you for the third section here in a little bit.
All right. Fantastic. So the next thing I want to talk about is turnover reporting. I remember, I think it was 2012-ish. And I was telling everybody that we had the best turnover, meaning none. And those of you listening know that turnover in retail can be pretty high and pretty daunting. And so I was telling everyone we didn't have any turnover, and it was a great place to work, and super happy about the way things were running. And I hired an HR consultant. We had, in 2012, we must have had 8 stores. At that point, about 150 employees. And I hired an HR consultant because we didn't have anyone on staff doing HR. And she showed up one day, and I remember thinking like I was the child in the elementary school class with the teacher saying, sit down, I'm going to teach you something. She said, first of all, you're way too big. Do not have someone in HR. Second of all, you can't talk about all of these great things in absolutes when you don't truly have any numbers to back them up. So she helped me hire our first HR manager, who's still with us. So obviously we're doing something right. And she and I laugh about how I said, you're never going to have any personnel problems. Everything's great. I just want you to help make sure that our policies and procedures and training is going well. So you can imagine, she hung her HR shingle. She works out of one of our Baltimore stores. And about 2.5 minutes later, she starts getting calls. Not dramatic calls, but there were things that I just didn't have time to think about, and things that people weren't telling me because they didn't they didn't think I had time to think about. Now I realize I should have been. But anyway, the first thing Anne Marie said is we need to track turnover. I want to know what our numbers really look like. Because once you know that data, there are so many amazing things that you can do to affect it. So it's kind of known industry-wide, at least I hear it, I've heard it more than once, that it costs about $2,000 to $2,500 to onboard somebody. So the process of hiring them, going through the interviews, getting them to the store, getting them trained up to speed on the floor, et cetera. And we often do, we put a lot of value into the hiring piece, and then someone joins the company and we sort of throw them to the wolves. I mean, it happens all the time, especially when you're short. Oh my gosh, my cashier quit. I have to have a cashier start tomorrow. And there's not a lot of time to bring he or she up to speed. So we realized that it was very important for us to not be spending that money so dramatically. We track it quarterly and annually. We want to see if we have particular quarters of the year that are worse than others. And I also don't want to wait till the end of the year to find out that one of our stores has had some kind of meltdown when it comes to turnover. So if you're doing it quarterly, you have a chance to catch maybe a challenge before it becomes a real problem. So there's a couple of things. We removed all of our seasonal employees from the data, and everyone listening might know this, but at the time it was a big deal for us, because if you hire seasonally and those folks are there for, let's say, 90 days during the summer, and you throw them into the turnover reports, the reports look terrible. The second you take them out, because they didn't actually get fired or quit, they were asked to just perform for 90 days and then leave, the numbers start to look a little bit better. So we do separate those folks out. If somebody stays less than 60 days, so the first thing that we're really looking at is who stayed less than 60 days and where. Which stores did they stay at for less than 60 days? Because there's two distinct things that we know that are happening. One, we're either hiring incorrectly, so that's a conversation and training opportunity with the manager. Or two, the onboarding of that person isn't working. And it could be both of those things at the same time, but certainly the onboarding we learned years ago, and we still are not great at it. You can't just hire someone and put them in the plumbing department. You can't just hire someone and say, hey, go work in the plant department. There needs to be a bigger conversation than that, which again, I think sounds pretty logical when you're talking about it, but putting it in practice is not always fantastic. Our ROI for us for that $2,000 to $2,500 is if someone stays for a year. So when we look at our turnover, the bigger chunk of folks who stay for at least a year, we feel like we've made a difference. And of course, for us, we want people to move up and on if they can't be promoted at our store. And so a healthy amount of turnover is also good. I've seen lots of locations where the teams get stagnant. People have stayed forever. At some point you have to stop raising hourly wages. I'm all for higher ones, but you can't run a store where everyone's making $30 an hour, for example. And people get complacent or bored. And so you want to have a little bit of turnover happening. And so we're just hoping we can get people to stay for a year and enjoy it while they're here. I think I'm going to pause there for a second. Renee, I'm not sure if you wanted to see if there were any questions specific with turnover before we go to stay interviews.
Sure. So we had two different questions. So again, and this is something that we're bringing up throughout, just because there are many multi-operation stores. If a single store, maybe they don't have someone devoted to HR, could they still get good information from something like this? And would they maybe be able to in a smaller location?
Yeah, so I I said I was bragging about how great we were with turnover, right, before we actually truly measured it. And what I ended up finding out is that we were 50% of the national average for retail turnover. No one should want to be average. I don't want to be average, but I did feel a little bit better knowing that we were only half as bad as everybody else. So I think it's just important to bring that up. It can be a manual process. I think if you find it valuable and you think that it's good for you to know, there is a way to figure out how to do this on an Excel spreadsheet. I think you can also hire outside, like I did at the very beginning. I hired an outside HR consultant who can do these things for you, but not be on staff. So if you're at a point in your business growth that you can't afford someone in that role, you can outsource pieces of it and still have this kind of thing taken care of.
Sure. And then the other question we had was when you first began tracking turnover, because I know you said initially you thought, oh, we have perfect turnover. We don't have any problems with it. But did you notice after that first year or two any improvements once you were tracking it? And then how does this also maybe apply to employee diversity within your organization as well?
So those are both very good questions. We did realize improvements. Not every once in a while we'll have this randomly spiked quarter, but we realized a couple things from the very beginning. We were not onboarding, we were not interviewing appropriately. So we learned a lot. We took a deep dive into our interviewing process. And so I'll just give you an example. We have several core values that we govern ourselves by. We now ask questions in our interviews that relate to our core values, which means if it's important to us and the managers, it should be important to the new hire or potential new hire. So we really revamped our hiring process. And then taking a look at that onboarding process, when you look at one store, for example, and there's really a bad turnover at that less than 60-day time frame, what's going on with the onboarding? Are you firing people and then hiring someone and throwing them into that cashier role? And so we really had a deep dive at that onboarding process. This gets very hard. I mean, when you have turnover and you need someone to fill a role, it's very easy to just, throw someone to the wolves. And so this is something that I think we're probably going to continue to struggle with. It's less formulaic than just, this is how you interview and hire. So we have definitely made strides in those two processes. And again, that doesn't mean that we don't still see a random spike in turnover, but it's gotten a lot better. In terms of diversity, again, it can be anecdotal. You can track, for example, women at one of my stores. And if I notice that everybody who's leaving happens to be female or the majority are, why is that happening? Is there some conversation that needs to happen? Is there some, conversation, basically. And so there's a whole host of next steps that can be talked about with HR and the managers, which I think in general just makes us a more well-rounded place to work, shop, and it makes our leaders better.
Definitely. Great. Well, we'll see you for the last section here in a little bit.
All right, great. So the next thing, I think maybe this is the last section, right? I wanted to talk about stay interviews. And this was really valuable for us. So for those of you who have worked outside of a hardware store, I know it's shocking that some people do ever. When you've left a company, you may have had someone give you an exit interview. And I remember my last exit interview was probably, 20 years ago at this point. I remember thinking to myself, why didn't they ask me these questions when I still worked here? So we've implemented a quarterly stay interview. I would like it to just be, hey, why are you still here? But my HR manager decided it should be more professional than that. So I'm just going to read you the questions. We pick a random sampling. And so you see the double X's in here. She may decide, and I leave it up to her discretion, that one quarter she's going to ask everyone who's been here for 5 years or more. The next quarter, she might ask everyone who's only been here for 6 months. And so that's just a random sampling of employees that she pulls out. And of that subset, let's just say there's, 30 that have been here 5 years or more. She probably is only going to pick about 10. We want this to be bite-sized, manageable responses. And this is not anonymous. And I think that's important to know. So these are folks that we really want, and we explain that outright. We want people to know that if they're answering and it's something that's concerning to us, we might follow up with them about their concerns. So unlike the employee engagement survey that is anonymous, this is not anonymous. So the questions are, there's 5. What do you like most about working here? If you could change something about your job, what would it be? How do you like to be recognized? What talents are not being used in your current role? And what might tempt you to leave? The answers that I have gotten are just, they are so telling and great for me. So, I'll often get things like, I love helping people. Customer service is just a natural for me. My manager is constantly telling us what a great job we're doing. I remember one quarter I got, someone said, I'm afraid to leave. Well, this is why it's good that it's not anonymous. I wanted to know why that associate was afraid to leave. Was it a self-esteem issue, a confidence issue? a fear of repercussion issue if you start looking for another job. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why somebody might say something like that. And so it gives us a chance to have some conversations with folks about ways that their particular location might be better if they are staying, or how we can help them leave if it's truly something they want to do. It's amazing to me how many people say, well, I'm afraid to talk about wanting another job because I don't want my boss to get mad at me. Well, if your passion is to work in the HVAC industry and you're tired of working in a plumbing department at a hardware store, I want to help you make that leap. And I know not everybody does, but that is the philosophy that we have. And so this stay interview helps us get to those answers. I review this with the HR manager and my husband, and then we take any appropriate follow-up action we might have. It's really great if like somebody will give us a nugget about, what they love. And it turns out that it's something very specific that one manager's doing that he or she just hasn't shared with the rest of the team. So, I don't know, Chris, I'm not going to think of a good example right now, but if one manager's doing something that's making his team or her team happy, I want all of the other managers to know that idea and to potentially implement that idea in their store too. So the stay interview really gives us the opportunity to do that, and has just been super beneficial. And it's very easy. I mean, again, we only send it to maybe 10 people at a time. We do it quarterly, and we get some really, really valuable feedback from it. That ends section 3. Renee, you got any questions about a stay interview?
Yeah, we do. So are there any initiatives that you guys have ended up doing based off of these stay interviews? I think that's, there were some interesting things that you even kind of mentioned anecdotally, but what are some things that maybe has sparked a new idea or maybe even a change for an employee that mentioned something that they weren't actively doing or wanted to do more of?
So 2 things. One, I believe that our Golden Hammer award, which is what we call our Employee of the Month award, started because someone said that they appreciated winning the Employee of the Month at their store, and we didn't have a program. We just had never implemented something like that. And so I saw that on a stay interview, and I thought, oh my gosh, why aren't we doing this everywhere? So that was one thing. The second had to do with some leadership development among various strata of staff. So for example, my marketing manager works with one person at each location that's called a communication coordinator. I don't know if that's a term from ACE or if we made it up, but when she wants someone to hang signs in a location or help with an event at a location, that's the person she relies on. Well, what we realized is that she's got a whole wealth of knowledge that might help this particular subset of employees get a job in marketing somewhere else or in advertising somewhere else, or just anywhere bigger than what we will be able to give that person. So this was perfect for her because she started out as a sales associate at one of our hardware stores and now runs marketing for the entire company. And she's brilliant, but she knew to speak up for herself. She knew when that role was becoming available, I can't hire 13 new marketing people from all of the stores. And so she's created a launching pad basically for future leaders or future growth for this strata by hosting essentially like fireside chats with this group. So she just started this year. It just came out of a stay interview. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So what are some of the core values for the business? We're just kind of curious about that.
Yeah. So always grow and share is one of my favorites because, what do we have? 25,000 SKUs, and there's always something we can be learning. I always tell the new hires that they should find something to geek out about so that everyone on staff knows what they're geeking out about. So that's one of my favorites. Be a good neighbor. A lot of people don't think that cities feel like small towns, but each major city is divided into small neighborhoods, and each neighborhood can feel like a small town. So when I leave the store where my office is, I might run into 10 customers who are my neighbors. So being a good neighbor is a good one. That's also a really nice one for an interview question, because if I'm interviewing someone who has been out of the workforce for any particular reason, it might be hard to get them to talk about job experience, but I can ask them to give me an example of when they've been a good neighbor.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
That's
it's a nice answer.
And then do you post in your break rooms or on cards? I really liked those 5 prompts that you bring up for the stay interviews, but do you keep that somewhere and keep it kind of top of mind for people so they can constantly be thinking about it, or?
No, and we probably should actually. I would say that they probably the first couple times came out of the blue for the team, but no, we don't keep that anywhere. It's a good idea.
Just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. All right, I think we have one more section, right? Or do you have another question? Sorry.
One more section, and then we'll ask questions after that one.
All right, awesome. So I think, the topic today was diversity and inclusion. And my take on the topic when I was having my debrief with the NHPA is really to think about an HR department holistically, even though it's the entire company that needs to be involved. And so the point that I'm trying to make with all of these things is it needs to trickle throughout the organization, and it needs to feel like it's a true part of the organization. And so the ways that we do that to really hone in on the fact that we want this to be a bigger initiative or a bigger part of our company is the idea of ongoing events and recognitions. Years ago, I worked at a company that called it the ABCs, the anniversaries, the birthdays, and the celebrations. And so we like to find as many things as possible that we can to celebrate. And so from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, every month has something in it that we're celebrating. It might be Black History Month. It might be Gay Pride where you live. It might be Women's History Month. It might be National Hispanic Heritage Month. I want the folks in my company who identify with those groups to know that we care about them. And so we celebrate them, and we celebrate them a couple different ways. We will post on social media. One that we're proud to be part of, Gay Pride Month, for example, with pictures of employees who are taking part. To the Employee of the Month program, which I said, which is just it's a very basic thing that anyone can do. But it gives us a chance to recognize, somebody every month at each one of the stores. And then the idea of anniversaries, birthdays, and we documented sobriety milestones here. We have a history of hiring folks who are in recovery for drug and alcohol issues. And I want to make sure that those folks understand that we want to celebrate any milestones they're having. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to hide. And so for me, that also helps create a more diverse and inclusive work environment. And so we have a lot of fun with our newsletters and our social media posts and signs in the stores. And I feel like we're kind of always celebrating something and asking our team to celebrate too. And we get I feel like I can anticipate one of Renee's questions, but we get lots of really positive feedback about this being part of our culture. It makes me very proud to say that that's the kind of company that I've helped build. So vendor and supplier diversity, which is a build, I think, on taking care of our inside house, right? Taking care of the employee base, which should make the outside of the house, customers, vendors, suppliers, more interesting and build that foundation. And so with vendor and supplier diversity, we do a couple different things. We started working with local makers in DC and Baltimore probably about 8 years ago. And we do that in a couple different ways. We allow, we allow makers to use the sidewalks in front of the stores to hold, makers fairs where they sell their products. We've brought several of the products into the stores. So again, this idea of, rising tides, you might make something like dish towels or greeting cards that you're just not big enough to get into a bigger retailer. But if you can put on your resume that you're selling it at an Ace Hardware store, it looks really good. And we want to give that opportunity to several of our local makers. Within the maker movement, we can then choose from, is this a local maker who is African-American? And we really want to make sure that that we're focusing on a diverse group of makers. And so we are fortunately in a city with a market with lots of people who are making things and professionally making things. And so they are worthy of being in a Target or a Walmart or an Ace Hardware store. So that's been really fun. We've met some really cool people. I can tell you all kinds of great stories, but we're licensed as a woman-owned business with the city and with the local airports authority. Many of you know this, but I've talked to lots of people who don't know that they have this opportunity. So it helps with our B2B initiatives, and it just helps with publicity in a whole interesting group of ways. I mean, I've had folks who have said, I want to buy from someone local, which gives me a chance to explain what the co-op means. when they find out that we're local, or I want to buy from a woman-owned business. And so we have started to do that on the flip side. So for example, if we're going to evaluate our technology company, the IT company that we outsource our tech to, or our accounting firm, we are going to start looking at that from a more diverse perspective. How many folks on the team are women? How many folks on their team are people of color? When we make the decisions of how we're going to choose our service providers. So really it's putting our money where our mouth is, and helping to build a much bigger and more inclusive workplace in city. So that kind of leads me to the end.
Yeah, so we have a couple more questions kind of touching on this and just some follow-ups. But how would you say your staff, whether it's women or someone of color or from a different background, or any of those different areas, how have they responded to some of these ways that you recognize them? And do you think that it has helped improve employee satisfaction and retention overall once you started implementing these different ways to really showcase people and celebrate them as part of your team?
Yeah, I could, Renee, I could spend the next 2 hours giving you stories of and reading, thank you emails and compliments that we get, that just folks who worked other places where they didn't feel like they were seen, or they didn't feel like they were valued for their, for whatever diversity they brought to the table. And so that's been really valuable for us. And then from a customer standpoint, our customers know that we celebrate all of these things. And a lot of them find that important, right? They want to shop in companies that value diversity, or who aren't afraid to say the words gay pride or whatever. So all of those things are very important to us, and we do get a lot of feedback.
Yeah, well, that kind of breaks off of another question we had about how have these things, like for your customers, do you think that it almost goes hand in hand? Because if you have employees that are from your neighborhood, as one of your initiatives is to be a good neighbor, so you're hiring people from the community that you're part of, and then when they come shopping, maybe someone is able to answer them in Spanish or can help someone who looks like them, and so they feel seen and recognized. Would you say that those two things almost help each other?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I opened our first store 18 years ago, my husband wasn't going to join me. And so I was a woman opening a hardware store, which was a novelty at the time. And I felt that very acutely from the beginning. And I never wanted that to be an issue for any of my teammates. And I do think that communities you feel more welcome when you see yourself in the people welcoming you, right? And so if you walk into a business and you can see a variety of folks who can help you, and even as simply as the language that you mentioned, if I'm a Hispanic contractor and I'm not comfortable with English, whatever, if I know I can find someone in the paint department who's going to help me in Spanish, I win that sale, right? So as a business owner, I win off the bat. But I have also made somebody feel more comfortable. It's like welcoming someone into your living room and wanting them to sit down and be comfortable. I think as business owners, we have to create that environment, because the opposite can be just bad. People still shop where they have those experiences, but I don't want to be that person. And again, we don't get this right 100% of the time, but we'll continue to strive to try and get it right.
I remember a couple of years ago when I got to meet you in person, I was out in DC for a trade show, and I stopped in, and you actually had a ladies' night event. And I remember you had a bunch of vendors set up, and I don't remember which store it was. I was in DC, so I think it might've been Logan, maybe. But it was really cool because you just see, the store was packed, and this was before COVID, but it was just cool seeing so many people coming out. And I have a friend who lives in DC, and she was like, oh, that's my hardware store, and mentioned one of your employees' names. So, as someone who's been in your store, not necessarily shopping, but just visiting and seeing everything, I've gotten to kind of see what the community and neighborhood feel is like. And I just want to commend you and recognize
Thank you.
I think that's really cool.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah. And then kind of one last question that I have, and this is a little bit more overall in general. And, we've been talking about this for a couple months now, and we're so appreciative to have you on the line and talking with us. how and why can independent retailers, like no matter where they're located, find ways to, whether it's hiring or bringing more people on? Sometimes this topic, I think people almost get overwhelmed or just would rather not deal with it. And I definitely think it's something that, can't really ignore or avoid. So what ways can they maybe take some of the nuggets that you've taught today? And if they haven't done much, or maybe they have done a little bit and they want to do more, like what advice would you give to someone?
That's a big question, Renee.
I know.
I would, so I've always been taught to start small. Well, there's a couple things. I think the topic is very heady. It's very nerve-wracking for people for a couple reasons. One, we're uncomfortable as a society oftentimes talking about these topics. And I think it's important for us as leaders to recognize that. If you're uncomfortable talking about it, recognizing that and figuring out what that means to your business. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that I think we need to think about. I have a fantastic mentor who has always said that we can't be afraid to talk about it. And so I've learned a lot from him. But then the second part, I think, is just starting small. And the turnover report is one of the best ways to do that, because if you measure your turnover and then you look and see who's leaving, you might already have some pretty rich data. And let's just say I don't know, if you live in a place where everybody's all 25, you live in a place where everybody's all white, you're not going to get the diversity from a person of color response if that's literally your entire population, which, I mean, I guess there are places that are like that. So you might want to look and see, is there an age group that's leaving? Is it only men that are staying? Is it only women that are staying, right? It can go in both directions. But doing that turnover report will give you some kind of overview. And I think particularly if we have one store, or two, I think we tend to think, well, we know, right? We know everything because we can see them every day. And I do think that it's a little short-sighted for leaders to think that they always have their pulse on all of those kinds of things just because it's one store or two stores that you're managing, because there's so many things that we have to do. I mean, our days are, honestly, folks that have between 1 and 3 stores have a much, much harder time, much, much harder job than I do, because they really have to do so much. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I would say starting small and figuring out why you want to do something, why this is important to you, and going from there.
Yeah. And I think that, local businesses like your 13 stores or any other retailer across the country or in North America can start doing these things. And I think overall we can be better neighbors to each other no matter where we're at. So I really love that piece that you have. And I think that that's something, if you almost think of it of like, what can I do to improve my neighborhood or help the customers that I serve? How can I make them feel more included? And I also really liked when you touched upon, coming into the industry as a woman, 18 years ago. And I think that our industry's made great strides in female representation. There's still definitely a ways to go, but I think that it's another example that we can continue to grow and learn from each other and try not to always avoid those uncomfortable conversations, because it can lead to some great outcomes and some great initiatives you can put into your business. So
yes, totally agree. Well said.
So much for joining us today. I think that this was great, and I really enjoyed getting to have you on and share your thoughts and help us tackle this topic. Is there anything else that you want to share with our people attending today?
No, I think that I just would love to say that the association has been a wealth of information for me. I think what you're trying to do is fantastic. You're leading the charge, particularly when it comes to this topic. So, if anyone's listening, anyone who's listening wants more information, I assume Renee can give you a whole bunch and connect you with me if you want to talk about it, any of my initiatives further. But I really appreciate the opportunity to come have this conversation.
Well, definitely. Well, we enjoyed having you as well.
Thank you.